Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules, and at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome to another edition of BO8, The Revival. It's already been a wild show here because the program crashed out for like 20 minutes right as we were going to start, and I'm all fucking agitated. So maybe it'll make for an even more entertaining program, and I'm sure it will be because we got an old friend on the show, Josh Cutchin. We talked to him. Now it'll be about 3 months ago or so for the anniversary special, and he teased that he had a new book out at the time, and I have it here with me. It's Fourth Wall Phantoms. Reflections on the Paranormal, Narrative, and Fictions Becoming Fact. And it's another Cutch classic. It's a monster book. People can't see it, but I hold it up for this. If a burglar broke into my house and I threw it at the burglar to deter them, they would probably press charges against me. That's how formidable this book is. They'd be like, yeah.
Yeah, you buy my books and you get put on a registry of some sort.
Jesus. But it's a very well. First of all, how you been, Cutch, since April when we talked?
I've been good. It's as we were sort of commiserating about before the show didn't start recording. I'm waiting for a lot of stuff. I got some exciting stuff happening, but it's not happening until the end of a very intense Georgia summer. So I'm just like putting one foot in front of the other, trying to get to that point. But I'm staying busy. The reception to Fourth Wall Phantoms has been fairly encouraging, which I'm really grateful for because it's not for everybody. That's for sure.
It's monstrous. I was joking, but it's quite it's exhaustive. That might be the best way to put it. It's intense.
Yeah. Well, So to finish the other thought,
yes.
I'm still plugging away on some other projects and stuff. No rest for the wicked. It's kind of. I probably never will write a memoir, but there are some aspects of this that are kind of memoir-esque, and it's this past May marked 10 years in the field as somebody who has their name attached to books. So there's some of that in there too. You say it's comprehensive, but like I've I've seen some reviews online that are like, oh, he didn't talk about Derrida and Baudrillard and like he didn't talk about these philosophers and this philosophy, and it's also cursory. And I'm like, well, dude, what do you want from me? Like, it's 176,000 words. There's only so much that you can cram in. But yeah, it's a very personal book in some odd ways, and there's a lot more opinion in there than there usually is in my work too.
Yeah, well, it's speculative in a sense. It's sort of like pondering. It's a pondering,
Yeah, and like it's all my books are a little bit like this, but if someone came along tomorrow and like completely refuted the idea, I'd be like, oh, thank God, thank God it's not this weird and complex. But, a lot of it is just me sort of feeling out the implications of what I talk about. And, it's also kind of a served as a gathering place for some bits and bobs, some odd ideas that I've had over the years that didn't really seem to have a home. So anyway, I'm very pleased with if you think you'll like it, you'll love it, and if you don't think you like it, you might not like it. But that's sort of the picture of the book. Yeah,
interesting way of putting it. So I guess let's start with the basic premise of the book. So let's start with that because you kind of alluded to it, but we're going to
that might be helpful. All right,
yeah,
that might be helpful. There are these stories that I don't know what to do with. And I run into certain aspects of the phenomenon writ large that I just don't know what to do with these stories of any type. And I'm like, well, how do I fit this into the way that I can think about the way that the paranormal works? And one subset of stories that I just didn't know what to do with. Are these stories about fictional characters that appear in real life? It's the easiest thing, I would argue, maybe even the laziest thing, but also maybe the most realistic thing is to say, well, they're all bullshit, right? Stories about people seeing fictional characters in real life are bullshit. But like, I don't think it's the most interesting thing you can do with those stories, right? Like, what can you do about it? Like, how can you make this work, right? Was something I was interested in. So, for example, there's a very famous story about Walter B. Gibson, who wrote the novels of The Shadow. Anybody remembers that Alec Baldwin movie? That was actually based on these novels that he wrote and this radio serial that he had. And after he moved out of the apartment where he'd written about The Shadow, people were seeing this ghost in the apartment, and it was described as having an Inverness cape and a big broad hat, and it was assumed for the longest time that the apartment was haunted. But Walter B. Gibson later said, "Oh no, that's the thought form basically that I created while working on The Shadow." Similarly, Alan Moore, magician and comic book writer, created the character of John Constantine, and claims that he was, after having created Constantine, he was sitting in a sandwich shop in London, and in walks Constantine. And there are actually a lot of Constantine stories. So you have these stories here and there. I had no idea how pervasive they were. There's a book by Chidambaram Ramesh called Embodied Imaginations that goes into like how often this happens, especially with authors.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an entire, like, every now and then, I've said this before, but like every now and then, like, you run into a book when you're working on a new project and you're like, I want to copy and paste this whole thing into my book.
Yeah.
Not in the spirit of like, not in the spirit of plagiarizing it, but in the spirit of like, all of this informs, what I'm working on. And so like, the list of people who are really mainstream authors and people who are taught in literature classes and such, who have experienced this sort of phenomenon of interacting with their characters, is really quite astounding. And it goes all the way from, just the sense that the characters have autonomy to like, no, I saw them or they touched me. Another famous example is Heinrich Ibsen, who worked on The Doll's House, said that the character of Nora he actually, interacted with. And I had heard this as well from some friends of mine, who are like, really like straight-laced atheist authors, right? But who love to write science fiction or whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, if you write a character that's well developed enough, like they'll tell you what they will and won't do. And I'm like, wait, do you hear yourself? Like a character tells you what they will and won't do. But sure enough, I mean, it's something that happens a lot. There's in my mind, it's well known, but I don't know if a lot of people have heard it. But The Guardian and Durham University did a survey of authors at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and they found out that like 61% of the authors that they surveyed said that their characters were capable of acting independently. And even more startling, there were 56% of writers that reported visual or other sensory experiences with their characters, like while they're writing, like. And this goes all the way into like, some of them said that like, no, I actually do interact with the characters like in a more physical space. So it's a really common thing among authors. And I wanted to sort of explore that and say, well, what if you take this to its logical conclusion, what might that say about the paranormal? So obviously Ramesh did a great job of cataloging these examples with a bunch of literary figures, but I think that there's a lot that you can say about how much our expectations and our cultural fictions inform the realms of ufology and cryptozoology and parapsychology. So that was part of exploring this too. And then that naturally leads you into other places that are much more theoretical. But that was a large part of where this idea comes from. So, and part of it, Tim, is just like, I really love high strangeness. Like the weirder the high strangeness, the better for me. This is really weird. Like this is really
like the
weird.
height of high strangeness. Yeah, because you sort of take that idea, the fictional incursions, as you call them, and then you, instead of sort of just being like, okay, here are the stories, like this guy did, God bless him. But you sort of then look at, okay, well, how might this work? like how might this work in the framework of like like kind of pressing your face right up against the glass of God, where it's like, okay, how is this? Do you think, not to get too inside the actor studio with you, but do you think this book, now it's very personal at the beginning, but do you think maybe in some way, and let's just go with what I'm going now, do you think this grew out of maybe, because you just had a foray into fiction?
Yeah, I mean,
this kind of grew out of that in a sense. What did it? I guess. Yeah, but you would know.
This is 100% on that continuum, right? So, I wrote Ecology of Souls, which a lot of people had a lot of kind things to say about. It was very popular, and like the worst thing that happens when you find yourself in that situation is like you're like, oh shit, what do I do next? What do you do next? And so that was why I was like, oh, I'll write a novel. I'll do something completely in a different direction that I don't have any sort of responsibilities or duties to the source material, right? Like I can do whatever I want to when I write.
Yeah, exactly. It's very free.
And I think technically it came out after, but it was written before. It was kind of a product of the pandemic. Was my anthology on fairy films. That I edited that had people contribute to. So there's sort of like this fiction sort of thing going on in the background in terms of what I was thinking. And part of the reason that I wrote Them Old Ways Never Died, my novel, was so that I could have these experiences that we were talking about in that survey, right? I wanted to have a character say things to me, and I didn't quite have that.
You were looking for that to happen when you did it, or was it just
100%? Because like I said, I had some like atheist friends who like don't believe in the paranormal who said this to me, and I'm like, okay, well, if you're experiencing that, then exactly. I want to try it too. So I don't want to quite say that I did or didn't get those moments, because I will say that there are some really strange times when I'd be like really puzzling over something with my novel, and like I'd be about to fall asleep, and the answer, I would stress out about it all day, thinking about like a way to solve a problem or a way to make something feel organic or natural, not too convoluted. And I think about it all day. And then finally, like at the end of the day, I'd lay down in bed and I just say, okay, I guess I'll try to fix this tomorrow. And then like right as I'm about to fall asleep, the answer would come into my head, which is super hella annoying, because you're like, okay, well now I got to get up and I got to write it down because I'm going to forget it.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's a little bit of that. There's a character in my novel who is a pharmacist. And I did have an interaction with my local pharmacy where there was a pharmacist that looked very much like this other character. And for the longest time, I didn't see her at my pharmacy again. So I was like, oh shit. Did like, was she my tulpa? Did I create her? No, she's still there. She's a real person. But I don't know, maybe it was precognitive or something, or retrocausal, but so it's definitely part of exploring this idea in this territory. But at the same time, it came from like this, there was the sense that the current things that the paranormal accepts about this concept of fictional incursions just haven't really sat well with me. Because, the knee-jerk reaction is people say, oh, it was a tulpa, or, oh, it was a thought form. Like, oh, you concentrated super hard and you made it pop into reality. And look, that may play a role. But the actual historical documentation for tulpas is actually pretty thin. It just mostly comes from Alexander David Neal's account, and it has never really sat well with me. So I'm sympathetic to the idea of tulpas and thought forms and egregores and all this stuff that gets talked about, things being generated through collective belief. But at the same time, I've always been really struck by this quote that's apocryphally attributed to a variety of thinkers, James Hillman or Carl Jung. But it's this quote that, people don't have ideas have people. And that really has stuck with me. And, you see vestiges of this in different places. Like Tolkien said that he didn't make up Middle Earth, like he discovered it. He was like excavating Middle Earth in a sense. He's talked about that a lot more than I am able to mention in the book. P.L. Travers, the author of Mary Poppins, had basically this idea that idea sort of floated around like balloons, and they found people to latch onto. And, I think that if you're even moderately creative, like you realize that there's some truth to that. Like your best ideas like just come to you out of the blue and out of nowhere, And a big part of this book is sort of also taking a look at the possibility that retrocausality might play a role. So I'm not saying it doesn't, and in that case, it's a self enclosed loop. But I really think that there's some sort of external ontology, to get all fancy with my words. That there's these ideas exist independent of us in some space.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. Sort of, yeah, I've struggled to kind of put it into words in a sense too, but it's like sort of like a like a science of thought or science of ideas or something. Like there's more to ideas and the imagination than what we think. That it's like a force of some kind or an energy or something that we don't quite understand. People like that. People like just the imagination is besmirched so much, But it's the imagination is everything, man.
It's everything. Everything around you is the product of imagination.
Right? It's a preview of life's coming attractions.
Yeah, I mean somebody. Yeah, I mean not just art. Engineering requires imagination, and the design of the desk that you're sitting at required some sort of imagination too. Yeah, and I've engaged with a lot of challenging material over the years. May was my 10th anniversary. A Trojan Feast was 10 years ago this May. I've engaged with a lot of challenging material, but nothing has been quite as challenging as some of the stuff that I was forced to engage with in this book. So yeah, you have things like philosophical ideas of dual aspect monism and panpsychism and idealism and all these sort of things, but also just like what the imagination is, like that in itself, like a history of the way that human beings have conceived of the imagination is incredibly challenging because we just don't know what it is,
Right, exactly.
And so it takes you through Plato and then the Neoplatonists, and then there's a whole strand of speculation regarding the imagination that comes out of the Arabic world, and it's just like it's so overwhelming. But and I think part of the reason it is so overwhelming is because like we're no closer to figuring out what the hell it is, and where those ideas came from, and I think that. It's as good an answer as anything. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's as good an answer as anything that these things do have some sort of outside existence. And it's not that hard to buy into that. If we're told that like time is an illusion and everything is happening simultaneously, well, then these ideas must have already exist right now. An idea I'll have for 10 years from now already exists in some way. So but it gets into that sort of wacky philosophical territory. So don't worry, folks. The book's not entirely like that. Like I keep trying to bring it back down to earth with some fun stories and stuff. But there is, I think you are sort of forced into some of these bigger questions about what the nature of reality is because of what the subject matter is demanding. Yeah.
Well, it's very much like the idea sort of took in my head where it's just like, again, to go back totally to the imagination, but it's when once something is thought of, it somehow exists in some fucking realm. And it's like you're trying to kind of get your hands around that realm, but I think most people just don't even consider it. But it's like it's some kind of fucking thing, some kind of like cloud or something.
Yeah, one of the most sort of simplest and challenging thought experiments that I ran across was this person by the name of Arthur Haswell, who wrote an article for the Essentia Foundation, which is a pro-idealist think tank, I guess. And so it's the idea that ideal. So if panpsychism suggests that consciousness isn't everything, idealism would be that everything exists in some form of consciousness. And but the way that Haswell puts it is he takes the idea of like, imagine a triangle. It's contradictory to say that a triangle is not a triangle, and a triangle is a triangle. So a triangle in your brain or in a dream is a triangle, and a dream triangle is not put into the physical, but it's still a triangle. It's just not physical. So there has to be something more to reality than the physical. And that's so simple, but like I think it does sort of handily illustrate the sort of there's something objective to our imaginations. It might not be permanent in the same way that, everything else that we sort of create is, but I think that there's something to it, which, it's kind of terrifying when you think about those horrible thoughts that you have every day.
Yeah, that's true.
Am I generating some sort of horrific karma by thinking horrible things about the person who cut me off in traffic? I don't know.
I didn't think of that.
So yeah, and this is the sort of path that you end up being led down. But I think that that's a lot of what the paranormal ends up doing. I don't know. To me, if you do it right, you end up thinking about these bigger questions and not just getting stuck in like, what planet do the aliens come from? Those are always the most boring questions to me. I think that these bigger questions are a lot more. They're more challenging, but they can be more rewarding too.
Yeah. Well, this whole what you're exploring is really centers around people themselves. So it's like it's not even so much paranormal. It's sort of adjacent in a sense. It's sort of like the interaction between people and whatever this unknown is.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of those reasons like why I want somebody to come in and be like, no, it's wrong. Because like I want there to be something outside of us that's doing this, and to be clear, like I'm not saying that people are imagining these sightings. I'm saying that like there's some sort of interplay between human consciousness and the way that reality works. That like, no, something does appear that may be drawing from our culture and from our imaginations and from all this stuff that like Tim and Josh could both see at the same time. Like it has some sort of objective quality to it. But but at the end of the day, like it does suggest that we play a big role in manifesting these things. And I don't want that to be the case. Like I suspect that it might be the case. And in some instances I'm hard pressed to find a better answer, but like, I kind of don't want that to be the case. Just like with, where the footprints end. Like I don't necessarily want Bigfoot to be weird because we're never going to have an answer for Bigfoot.
Well, that's true.
But at the same time, like there's a lot of stuff involving Bigfoot that's weird. So, I'm just trying to, I'm just curious. I'm just trying to see where these thoughts end up leading us. And I have to say that I do suspect that we'll never have answers to these things because I don't think these are quite the sort of things that we do get answers to. But
no, this feels like fourth, fifth dimensional shit. Where it's you don't know that until you die. Like once you can see in the other dimensions and shit.
Well, worse off. Well, worse off. I mean, like the worst case scenario is not only do you not find about it until you die, but like your consciousness has transcended so much that you don't care about it after you die. It's like, well, I never got it. Oh yeah, I got the answer, but now I don't care about it. Like that sucks. But yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that it's such a. The analogy that I've used for all things that are in the paranormal is it's like trying to like pick up a watermelon seed or like squeeze a watermelon seed. Like as soon as you put any pressure on it, it just flies across the room. Or trying to pick stuff up like that, like a pumpkin seed. It's the same way. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. So a name popped. No pun intended. I guess Vladimir Prop.
Right.
Propped out at me when I was perusing the book because I had him in my notes and briefly talked about him when I had Delaney Bowers on back in November. So, and I was like, it was just like, oh wow, this guy popped up again. I was really taken with his work, and I was like, this is pretty amazing. We talked a little bit about it, Delaney and I, but so I was surprised to see how good. I found him really interesting in that he managed to sort of assuage or however you'd classify these stories. He had a lot of stories, sort of story formulas that go beyond what we all know with the Joseph Campbell thing, but this was this dude was like real, he had sort of come up with detected all these base formulas for stories from like Russian folklore or something.
And that's what sort of about this. Yeah, that's what sort of drew me to sort of exploring what Vladimir Prop could bring to the paranormal is the fact that his work does predate Joseph Campbell's stuff by decades. And when you look at it, you can pretty clearly see like the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell made so famous embedded within Prop's work. I have yet to really be made aware of a smoking gun that says that, Campbell borrowed from Prop or whatever. But when you look at it, it's kind of hard to deny. Prop was a sort of considered sometimes one of the founding figures of narratology. So when I'm looking at the paranormal as narrative, it's like, well, I kind of got to talk about him, I guess.
Yeah.
But he ended up being really rewarding. He in 1928 he comes out with this book called The Morphology of the Folktale, where he sort of boils down primarily Russian fairy tales, or wonder tales, as he wanted to call them, into 31 basic functions, which leads to a very exhausting part of the book where I list all 31 functions.
Oh, no. It's like Baskin Robbins.
But what I think is really interesting about him, number one, there are some, like, I would argue that there are some sort of, like, not quite paranormal adjacent, but like mystic adjacent things that sort of orbit around Prop's periphery. Obviously in Soviet Russia, you couldn't really come out as being a mystic, especially if you're, on part of Leningrad University. You can't really. You probably shouldn't come out and say that. But there are allusions in some of his work that he sort of was an idealist. We were talking about idealism, and that he sort of had a mystical sort of interests that I sort of traced. But the other thing that I found really compelling was that his so the Joseph Campbell stuff, the hero's journey, refusal of the call, and then the belly of the whale. Like, I'm not going to go over it because it's sort of part of the cultural zeitgeist, and like you see it in films all the time now. It's like Star Wars, basically, right?
Yes.
Like I think Campbell said that George Lucas was like his best student, right? So like it's Star Wars, right?
Yeah. Pause it and go on Wikipedia and come back if you have to, folks. We're not going to catch you up.
So not only does Prop predate Joseph Campbell, not only is the hero's journey in there, but like there's something that I see about the Joseph Campbell hero's journey that can like so easily fall back on like just like, oh, these are metaphors, and this is psychology, like this is the psychology of the hero, and like this is the way that. And Vladimir Prop's work places so much of an influence on like actors within the story, like actual like people or characters as a catalyst for these events, that it's like it seemed like it could be more rewarding to compare modern paranormal experiences, specifically alien abductions, to Prop, because like there's no escape hatch saying, oh, it's all a psychology. Like, no, it doesn't work unless there are characters. Like the characters are an important part of Prop's work. So I went through all 31 of the basic functions, which are more or less chronological, and I'm not going to bore everybody here. I think it's an important part of the book, but it is probably a little bit too granular for our discussion. But like really showing how you can assign different characters that Prop had to some different aspects of alien abductions. The villain might be the aliens, or the villain might be the government conspiracy or whatever. But like there are these roles that shift and change that all seem to align more or less very, very closely with Prop stuff. I mean, just to provide an example, there's one of the early functions that Prop lists is he talks about how the villain of the story might use different techniques to cause harm or injury to a member of the family through abduction, or spoiling the crops, or causing bodily injury, or a sudden disappearance. And this is all fairy stuff, alien stuff that you would see centered around an abductee. Interestingly enough, there is a pivot point just after that point where like Prop called it the victim hero, where the victim shifts from being a victim to being a hero, and that's where the hero's journey kicks in. And that's, of course, people like Keith Thompson have compared alien abductions to the hero's journey. But like later you get like this one of Prop's fairy tale functions is like, oh, the hero is branded or receives a mark, and it's like, well, that's the alien implant thing, right? So what does that mean? I think it means that the structure that we see in alien abductions resembles those of fairy tales, or just some of our earliest narrative structures. The scaffolding seems to be the same. Does that mean people are making it up? I don't think it does. I think it suggests that like reality itself sort of operates on narrative beats. Now, is art imitating life or life imitating art? I don't know, but I think that that's something that demands some closer scrutiny. It's interesting to note that both Mircea Eliade and Peter Gillet, another scholar that I found, compared, they sort of distilled and compounded props functions, and we're not only able to compare them to other cultures outside Russia. So we're like Gillet, for example, compared them to peoples on 6 continents. So like, seems to be relatively universal, but also that these sort of encode a lot of aspects of, shamanic initiation. And then from there, it's a hop, skip, and a jump to the alien abduction stuff, because people as far back as Eddie Bullard and Simon Harvey Wilson have mentioned, the similarities between alien abductions and near-death alien abductions and shamanic initiations, which also have a lot in common with near-death experiences. And now we're back in ecology of souls territory. So it does suggest to me that like there are these archetypal narratives that run through our lives, and they manifest in different ways, but like reality itself might be structured like a story. Now, did we invent stories because they're resembling life or vice versa? I don't know. But that does provide a foot in the door and sort of buttresses one of the other chief arguments in the book, which is being really sympathetic to Jeff Kripal's assertion that you can interpret paranormal experiences as textual processes. And the reason all this is important, sorry, I told you like this is going to be minimal work because I've got my I got my rambling talking points all lined up here. But like if paranormal experiences are sort of textual, and Jeff doesn't necessarily mean that as literally as I'm taking it, but I like to take it literally so I can dial it out and take it figuratively. If paranormal events can be viewed as textual processes, then what does it say that we get these moments when characters step off the page or out of the screen into our reality? What does it say about imagination? What does that say about fictions? And what does that say about the fact that this idea of the fourth wall and how it gets broken, I think is an incredibly potent metaphor for how the paranormal functions. To fill people in a little bit, in case they don't know the term the fourth wall, there's this idea in the theater that you have the backdrop and you have the sides of the stage, and then like there's an invisible fourth wall between the actors / characters on stage and the audience.
Or the TV screen or whatever. Yeah, like for people,
exactly,
who aren't born in the 1920s.
right. But so anytime that gets someone on stage, or a character or an actor on stage acknowledging the audience is breaking the fourth wall, a character looking at the TV screen and acting as if they're talking to the audience is breaking the fourth wall. But interestingly enough, that term breaking the fourth wall is actually not what narratologists use, and is a lot more of a widespread concept than we really appreciate. By which I mean, there was this, I don't know if you ever... Are you a Black Mirror guy? I don't know if we ever talked about that.
On occasion.
Okay.
I've only seen a handful of them.
They did this like choose your own adventure style thing on Netflix where you could choose which actions the characters would do through Netflix. Like,
interesting. I'm going to try that.
Yeah. And that is sort of its own version of breaking the fourth wall, right? Because there's an interplay, a dialogue between the audience and the action that's happening, right? So choose your own adventure novels are breaks in the fourth wall, but narratologists don't use this term breaking the fourth wall. They refer to it as metalepsis, which is a more encompassing idea. And basically it's any time that, so breaking the fourth wall sounds like, the characters or actors are acknowledging the audience, but metalepsis is any sort of break of that contract, any sort of break of that barrier. So if a narrator talks to the characters talk to the narrator, or the narrator talks to the audience, like anytime that illusion is shattered.
Gotcha.
And I'll be damned if it doesn't sound like the paranormal. Like it just does. The more I got into it, the more I was like, you could just like Mad Lib switch out the word metalepsis for the paranormal and get basically this. You could turn a book on metalepsis into a book on the paranormal. And it's interesting because like metalepsis is a topic of intense narratological debate and a lot of scholarship. There are more books than I could ever read on the topic. Although I tried to pick some like pretty reputable thinkers on the topic, but really it speaks to so much of what you might see in paranormal encounters. It's that like realization that reality isn't what you thought it was.
Right,
for the characters or for the experiencer. Yeah, you're interacting with a higher power. That higher power is interacting with you and changing things that you could never change. Metalepsis is humorous and terrifying and all these things at once. But the thing that really kicked me in the face and made me say, oh, there's a there, is if you think about Greek vases, right? Classic Greek vase. All the characters are portrayed in profile, but there are exceptions. So the characters are in profile, which means that they're not looking at the person who is looking at the vase, right?
Yeah.
But the characters who are shown looking directly at the person who's looking at the vase are monsters, people who are dead, people who are asleep, people who are drinking or consuming some sort of mind-altering substance, and gods and goddesses. And it's like that's the same list of things that. That's the same list of entities with paranormal awareness, right? Monsters, the dead, sleepers, altered states of consciousness, and gods and gods.
Yeah. It's just like some serious paranormal sort of characters.
Yeah, and they're the ones in these Greek vases that are breaking the fourth wall. So I'm like, okay, it seems like a lot of our ancestors knew that there was something to this metaphor. And then I take that a little bit further later in the book. And I compare this idea of breaking the fourth wall of metalepsis to what John Keel called the reflective factor, which, if you've been around involved in the paranormal, you'll have heard this old adage that like, oh, as soon as you look at the paranormal looks back, that sort of thing. It happened more for me at one point in my life than it does now. I don't know about you, Tim, but I think there's something to that. And but it does sort of talk about how realities tend to break down once that crossing of that invisible boundary has been made in both narratives and in the paranormal.
Well, you've said a lot, Cutchin.
I know. I'm just dumping on you, and I'm
not
sorry.
Sure where to go.
I'm so sorry.
Well, what makes me think to take it into what you're talking about, it's hard for me to sort of jump from here, but at the same time, maybe in a sense, it's like we're the characters in the story. The paranormal, whatever the fuck it is, that's the audience. And it's like they can fuck with us somehow in different ways, but we're on the fucking page. Like we're two-dimensional. In a sense, or we're three-dimensional, and they're fourth-dimensional, and so we're acting out shit, and it's and there maybe whatever the other thing is the audience or whatever, and it's like that's why these stories keep like how if you watch, I'm a huge sitcom fan, right? It's like they probably connected to the Vladimir Prop thing, where it's like you always see the same ones. So it's like, oh. They got stuck in an elevator. They got stuck in a meat freezer. The power went out, and we're all here in the studio. We can't go home because it's a big storm or whatever. It's like the same stories repeat themselves all the time. I noticed that when I was a kid in sitcom. So it's like maybe we're as people. It's kind of like almost like history repeats itself. Also, where it's like just maybe we're playing out some greater story for the for the entertainment of the gods or something.
Yeah, it all. I think you're really nailing it here, because it all does come back to that sort of idea of orchestration. Like something else is not. We are not in control of our lives. Something else is pulling the strings, right? And I think that it's when you actually realize that and you actually look at the audience and you say, yes. Oh, wait, oh shit, you're doing this. That's when things get really haywire, because they're like, well, right. the jig is up. It's time to start fucking with these people even more,
Right.
So yeah, I think that there's something really really powerful in that, and I don't really know if I don't know how literal it should be taken. Do I think that there's some sort of Rick and Morty style audience and stagehands and directors and like I don't really think so, but it's a very powerful metaphor. I mean, like here's another good example, right? You've heard ad nauseum about like the trickster and the paranormal and how the archetype of the trickster is embedded in the paranormal. That's a metaleptic fourth wall breaking archetype. Like look at Deadpool, like Deadpool is a trickster. He's, or like any of those, my favorite, I love Disney cartoons and I loved Looney Tunes cartoons and stuff, but like the Tex Avery cartoons were some of my favorites because they would really do stuff like they would like stop the movie or they'd like pull up the frame and like climb out of a scene if they didn't want to be in it, like do stuff like that. Those are all metaleptic sort of things, but those are all humorous, trickstery kind of things, and like it's right there in one of the main attributes of the trickster. Tricksters are humorous, they're mischievous, they're deceptive, but they straddle boundaries, they transgress boundaries, and that's all of what fourth walls are. Where this idea of metalepsis is it's breaking those boundaries.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I was going to jump into when we were in the prop thing, just to circle back in a sense, I was sort of earlier saying how your book sort of planted a lot of ideas in my head about sort of like the science, for lack of a better, science of ideas. And it was like, what made me think that in a sense was this prop stuff and sort of just there's a formula to these stories. And it's like you can kind of vaguely feel like a sciencey sort of vibe to this, there's something to this where it's like, this can be kind of, put your hands a little bit around it in a sense and be like, okay, I can kind of see there's something going on here. I can't quite figure it out, but there's formulas and there's like things that follow, and it's almost like spells and rituals and alchemy of ideas. And there's, if that makes sense, I'm kind of like rambling myself, but it sort of got me into that idea where it's like, these aren't just like tropes. They're like recipes. Yeah,
that's why towards the end of the book, like I'm like, okay, it's time to talk about archetypes, right? Because like one of my favorite descriptions of archetypes, I mean, obviously Jung didn't say this because it was, way after his time, but like archetypes are the source code of the universe. Like they're like the ways that these things work when you or like they're the wireframes of the universe, right? Like when you take off all the surface appearances, like these are the different forms and functions of reality. And I think that that's exactly what you're getting onto as well. Is like, yeah, there are recipes. Like there are certain ways reality has certain best practices. And the more you tease that apart, the more like you see that, yeah, it kind of infects everything. But what I also like about that is while there are these certain like recipes and tendencies that you hear, if this does come from some sort of wellspring of imagination, then it really takes a lot of pressure off of like, well, why didn't that flying saucer behave like the other ones? Or like, why did these gray aliens have horns and no other gray aliens do in this particular account? It's like, well, it all comes from imagination. Like, it's all informed by that and like personal opinion and personal expectation. I mean, it's something that doesn't get talked about a ton, but it happens a lot, or it happens more often than you would realize, is people who are part of a multiple witness sighting and they agree that like, yeah, I saw a monster or a unidentified flying object, but they'll disagree on the particulars, right? Like they'll say, oh, it had red lights. The other one would be like, no, the lights were blue. Like it was definitely there. And or one of my favorite examples from the book is that these people in Woollerton Park in Nottingham in the UK, both were chased by something, but one of them said that it looked like a giant smoky donut, and the other one said it was a Bigfoot. Like, so like they were both like scared, and they both saw something, but they both saw something different. This is obviously sort of getting into co-creation territory where Greg Bishop's talked about a lot, but it speaks to the fact that there is some sort of dialogue, some sort of interplay between the phenomenon and us. And I think that's also sort of what metalepsis and fourth wall breaks are, right? There's some sort of interaction between what's on stage and what's happening, what's coming from the audience too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's a quote you have in the book where it's the presence of high strangeness specific. Yeah, I'll slow my roll here. The presence of high strangeness is specifically to induce plausible deniability, engender disbelief, or self-negate, which is, that's such a fixture of this phenomenon. And something that, like, is... I was kind of talking about skeptics last night with a different guest, and it was like they have no imagination. Speaking of imagination, but it's like that's kind of one of the things they can't seem to wrap their mind around often. Where it's like, no, you don't get it. Like, this is not. You can't get your arms around it. Like, they insist that that
Yeah.
they try to unravel it, and it's like, no. This whole thing is like precluded on fucking being on tight as a fucking knot.
Yeah. Well, when my twin boys were still infants, I would, dangle a string or something in front of their face, and they tried to grab it, and I would pull it out before they could grab it, or they would grab it for a moment, and then I'm way stronger than them, so I would just tug it out of their grasp. Like, they're not going to get the string, right? And so they could conclude, like, if they could have talked to each other in their baby voices, like, oh, there is no string because we can't grasp it, and we can't, every time we go for it, it's not there, so it must not be there.
Yeah.
And I think that might be something that we're dealing with, in these domains as well. It's like, you're not gonna put this stuff in a laboratory because it literally doesn't want to be there. Like, it literally does not want to be there. That is sort of God of the gapsy. That's what, a way that a skeptic might say it. Oh, you're invoking the God of the gaps, or you're saying that there must be some sort of, higher power that's orchestrating this. But, like, I mean, that's kind of the way it seems.
That's what we're saying. Yes, that is what we're saying.
and that's when the idea that reality, or at the very least these experiences, are stage managed, starts to sound like it makes a whole hell of a lot of sense to me. And so that does sort of, and like, so part of the reason that I said that was obviously that's a trickster aspect, that self-negating thing is something that George Hansen talks about a lot. But also, I think that if you're going to engage with the subject matter of this book, which involves a lot of fictional characters stepping into reality, and there are stories in there, folks, I promise. Like, there's tons of stories. It's not just
I
theory.
didn't want to. No,
it's I mean, we're digging into the theory, but there's a lot of just like fun stories. But if you're going to talk about hoaxes, I mean, that's what a hoax is, right? It's a story, it's a narrative, it's a fiction, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to talk about that because there is this tendency for hoaxes to generate real phenomena. I mean, like, so one of my favorite examples of that in the book is that there was a family of Mrs. Smith who in July of 1961 was asked to sketch the UFO that she saw, and she ended up sketching like a George Adamski style UFO. And this was before, those photos were revealed as frauds. So it's like, well, and she claimed that she had never heard of George Adamski. So it's like, well, where did that come from? Where, there's a similar story to be told about Gulf Breeze. Like, somebody was chased by the Gulf Breeze UFO, and offered the same description that there was in the Ed Walters photos, where he ended up using the model. I mean, you tipped me onto something similar, where there was the one I wrote from West Coast, a hospital-wide sighting in Canada that was later revealed as a hoax, and everybody was like, well, I don't know what that was supposed to be, but it wasn't what I saw. So, like, there is something about this that again, it kindles the imagination and allows people to actually see something. The example that I always provide is things like seances that happen in darkness, and you're like, oh, now it's kind of spooky and I can't really see what's happening, and like that's when the really weird stuff seems to happen. Jack Hunter does some great research on that. But another good example is like something like I mean, you don't even have to go into the paranormal realm. It's like placebo. Like, I'm still furious that we don't engage with like, what the hell is placebo, more than we do, right? Like, it's
right,
like, I gave this person a sugar pill and they got a ton's better. It must just be placebo. And I'm like, no, do you hear what you're saying?
Exactly.
That they believe that they get better, and so they got better. Like but that's basically what it is. Like, hoaxes are kind of like paranormal placebo pills, and that they like make you think, oh, there is something to this, and then it actually invites in the real strangeness, or the actual magic or the actual change happens because you've suspended your disbelief. Suspending your disbelief, a lot like what you might do in a movie theater, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting about the placebo. Yeah, they kind of dropped the ball there on the. It's like
I know, right?
No, it's like if we can cure ourselves with our minds by tricking it, we should be like that. Should be a clue that we can do some serious, awesome shit with our fucking minds, not just like, oh, you're fooling yourself into thinking you're better. It's like that's so fucking basic, dude. Go on.
Well, and it's one of those things where it's like. I really don't know how many times we've dropped the ball on other things too. I mean, it's like, the argument that I've always used too is that, a lot of the stuff that we know as mental illnesses, like we can sort of scan your brain and we can see that there's something odd happening, but like, we don't know exactly what mental illness it is until we talk to you about what you're experiencing, right? And so you get somebody who says like, oh, I can't help it, but I have this compulsion to to yell at squirrels or something. And then you find like 10 other cases around the United States where people are yelling at squirrels, and you're like, oh, this all must be the same sort of mental illness. But like that's entirely founded upon anecdote, right? It's entirely founded upon, people sharing their stories and us being like, oh, it seems like there is something that happens, but like we don't have an objective way of actually interfacing with that and knowing it. So much of what we know about, mental health conditions is because we are able to share anecdotes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So talk about, all right. See, I can tell you're itching to tell some stories. So there's a man in Miami.
Oh man,
who seemed to have generated actual Thunderbird sightings from some hoaxed gigantic eggs. I thought that was really interesting because, just let's talk about that, and then I'll put it in my note what I want to ask you about that after that. So tell that story.
Every now and then I'm writing something where I'm like, oh, so and so will really like this, and for whatever reason, like I'm writing this, and I'm like, Tim Binnall's really going to dig this story.
Oh, good.
The guy was a character, but I think it's a good example of like how all these things sort of come together. So there was a rash of large bird sightings in the Miami area in South Florida in early 1961. And around the same time, there were these classified ads that were saying like, you can get these rock eggs, which the rock is like this giant, sort of like an Arabic thunderbird is one way to think about it, like big enough to carry off elephants. And it said $600 per dozen. And like the price keeps on rising. And it's like, buy these rock eggs, buy these rock eggs, buy these rock eggs. And it turns out that this was these classified ads were being placed by this gentleman by the name of Louis Vanderkar, who was sort of a Miami fixture in sort of the weirdo art scene.
Yeah.
And he ended up having like a rock hatching party where he got everybody in the community to come out and like wait for this thing to hatch. And of course it didn't hatch because, not only were these art projects, but they were like garbage from his studio that he covered in plaster of Paris and then sold. And apparently he sold one to someone in Chicago for like $1,000 or something like that. But he claimed that these Thunderbird sightings that he was having were actually his rocks from an earlier version of the project where he'd like actually build them and the rocks hatched. Now it's the story ends with him like admitting that like he had hoaxed these. Wait, he hadn't hoaxed them, but like it was never these were never real. Like he said that, oh, I made them, I carved them out of rock, but like, I gave them a mystical, magical spell and they're genuine. And when the rock hatches, like only really, really super intelligent and good looking people can see them, like sort of a thing.
Is this Steve Ray? Is this Steve Ray?
Right, yeah. But it ends with him like saying it's a hoax, but like, I thought it was really cool. But like at the same time, people were independently like reporting these Thunderbirds, right?
Yeah.
And they were reporting it. If memory serves, he was doing the classifieds before people were reporting it. So it's not like he like capitalized on the sightings, I don't think. And people still see, like I would argue that sort of Florida is something of a Thunderbird or large undiscovered avian, as the cryptozoologist would say, hotspot to this day. But
Southwest, yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, but Florida, yeah. I mean, yeah, and there's just pteranodon sightings and stuff like that too. But what I think is really interesting, so you've got like these hoaxes and like these maybe real sightings too. But what doesn't get talked about so much in his past is that Louis van der Kar said that he was sort of a mediocre artist, and he ended up serving with the U.S. Merchant Marine in World War II. He gets his ship gets hit by a torpedo from a German U-boat, and he goes into the water, and it's freezing cold. And he says that while he's in the water, this entity from this Mitories system in outer space, it's a member of this alien race called the Atarians, but the alien's name, the entity, the disembodied alien's name is Jeb. It's like Jeb Bush, but his name is Jeb. And these aliens were fascinated with Earth art, and they chose to sort of basically he had a walk-in, right? He had a near-death experience, and he had a walk-in.
Yeah.
And after that, he becomes this like eccentric who actually is quite competent at art. You can see some of his art online. He did a lot of sculpting for amusement parks and miniature golf courses and stuff, but he was not a bad artist. And he was always sort of a prankster. But like so if you follow this sort of story, he basically has a near-death experience. He meets this non-human intelligence that walks into his body. He has this explosion of intelligence and artistic creativity and interest in the occult because he said that he was a magus. He started perpetrating hoaxes, and there were these Thunderbird sightings that still persist to this day over Florida. I don't know if that's an accurate read on the situation in terms of like, oh, those are all related, but like that is one of those narratives that you hear time and again with people who have experiences. Like there's a friend of mine by the name of Laura that I talk about in the book, who has had several near-death experiences and NDE-like experiences in her youth, and is a gifted artist who also seems to either predict things or has her art sort of manifested in reality too. So it's like this idea of like, again, it's just like a lot of the subject matter from Ecology of Souls. You die, you cross this boundary, you come into contact with something, you bring back a spark of that allows you to sort of change reality around you. And that's, that's the story of the shaman, that's the story of the alien abductee, and that's the story of the near-death experiencer. So I find that really fascinating, but it's just so nice that it's got this like little bow of a South Florida huckster on it too, because like he seemed to have a really good, like I would have loved to have just hung out with him because he seems so cheeky. He also put out other classified ads that said stuff like for sale, swamp colored UFO, must qualify, or like free cruise to the Bahamas, bring an oar, or electric car, $25,000, extension cord extra. It's like he was just a character, and lived a very colorful life, and he seemed to sort of understand sort of what it means to be creative and what it means to sort of thread that line between bullshit and truth.
Yeah. Well, maybe when you have an experience like that, it changes your perspective on death and everything. I assume it must. But
yeah, I mean,
you're not really, you kind of throw caution to the wind a little bit. Maybe not necessarily like in a physically risky fashion, but just like, you're like, I'm just going to live, baby.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like, Oh, you mean someone might be offended that I hoaxed them? Like, well, that's not that bad of an outcome. I've already,
Right.
I've already cheated death.
Well, it's interesting. The idea of sort of like fictional, in this case, creatures coming into existence. It always kind of annoyed me that I forget you'll mention him when you get into this topic as I roll it out. But it's the skeptic who was like, no, chupacabras came from the movie Species.
Oh yeah.
Like as if like I recently read someone kind of kvetching about it, rightfully complaining about it, grousing about it, and I agree with them. And they were like, Species was not even like a fucking big like movie. This was an ET. Yeah. It's like Species, but the argument is like, well, it looks a lot like the thing in Species, so clearly it's from the thing in Species, and it's like, I don't know. Really, that always kind of rankled me. So let's talk a little bit about the chupacabra because. I'm sure you got all these sort of UFO, Bigfoot. So I like Chupacabra because he's so kind of on the periphery.
Right. So yeah, I mean that's Ben Radford's book on the Chupacabra, and look, I admire that book in a lot of ways. People will say like open and shut. It was mass hysteria, Chupacabras, and it's like, okay, well, what the fuck is mass hysteria? Can we talk about that too? Because that gets trotted out a lot, and no one ever really explains what the hell that is. I think mass hysteria is a contagious idea, which is back to sort of what we were talking about, ideas having people. But yeah, his main argument was that there were similarities between the chupacabras and the design of Syl, the alien from Species, and the opening of Species takes place. There's opening establishing shot of the Arecibo Radio Observatory, which is in Puerto Rico. So I kind of get some aspects of it, right? But at the same time, I think it's just more interesting to engage with it in the way that I am, which is like, oh no, it was the alien from Species. Like people saw it and it took root, or there was something in the water that really grabbed hold of people that made them sort of basically manifest this thing. But I think that you bring up a really good point, which is well, they didn't, Species is not a cultural touchstone. It's not
right.
And and the flip side of that is that we have
just to jump in, I think that maybe in a sense it's like how I'm sure you would know because you're very steeped in this stuff. So I'm sure there's a word for it. But how the two different asteroid movies came out at the same time and the two different things came out at the same time. Maybe instead of this thing coming from Species, these two things fucking somehow burst into the zeitgeist at the same time. One fictional, one real. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they call that. I think it's called twin films or twin film syndrome. But it's at Armageddon and Deep Impact and Volcano and Dante's Peak.
Right. Yeah,
there's tons of them. And look, let's be honest. Some of them are what's hot. Some of them are studio espionage, Paramount's got this movie and we should get
for sure. Yeah.
We should do it quicker than they do. But I think some of them are, it's just there is an idea that's looking for somebody to
right. Well, isn't that what happened with fucking evolution or something? Two different scientists came up at the same time. Wasn't that the whole thing? They lived on completely different parts of the world and they didn't really something like that.
There's a broader no, you're absolutely right. There's a broader idea for this. Which is, Charles Fort called it steam engine time, which is this idea that the Romans could have had, steam engine trains because they understood, the power of the steam engine. And literally every culture that ever boiled anything could hear teapots whistling, but never put the two and two together, that the pressure could be used to move things and to do things and to be this part of this revolution. Right. Until, in Charles Fort's words, it became steam engine time. And he viewed this as almost something cyclical, seasons changing and stuff. And to this day, that term steam engine time has been adopted by some folks in sci-fi writer communities where it's people coming out with the same idea at the same time. And it's let's both write this book on this, cool idea, and but independently they arrive at that idea, and it's just it was an appointed time for that idea to take place. Again, you could argue like a line or a stage direction in a play. Like there's a time for this to happen, and it's happening right here. So I think that's worth considering. But also this idea of ideas being contagious, this concept of ideas being contagious. Our mutual friend Ren Collier has referred to the paranormal perhaps as a mimetic or noetic virus that sort of transmits between people. And, it happens enough and it causes a mass hysteria. Like, that's a better idea for what mass hysteria is than like, oh, a bunch of people got worked up. Like, that's not an answer.
Right.
But if this idea has some sort of like contagious quality, then that idea spreads between enough people and you get mass hysteria, and it persists long enough and it becomes like a cultural entity. So you do get like chupacabras still showing up in places like Puerto Rico. Yeah. And I really am sympathetic to that idea. I mean, it's just like with the tits, the blue tits. Rupert Sheldrake
trying to get me in trouble.
It's these birds, the blue tits. Rupert Sheldrake talked about how there was basically overnight there were these milk cartons that they had where the lids like had been fine. They've been bird proof for decades, but almost overnight, like all the birds across Britain, and specifically the blue tits, started like popping the lids off of these milk cartons, and there was no real explanation for how these birds all sort of shared that idea at the same time, but it all happened at the same time. So it's this idea that the idea was sort of contagious in that degree. Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, well. Yeah, it seems like a lot of this stuff, and I'm sure that people try to get to the bottom of it, but it seems like a lot of this stuff gets waved off, like mass hysteria, placebo effect, imagination. Stuff that's really hard to kind of fucking put into words. Ironically enough, is there's magic in these things.
Well, it's like it's like that idea, like the other thing that you'll hear from skeptics is like, oh, they have an overactive imagination. That's like, okay, well, what is it about that makes people see things? And again, these are all real slippery concepts, but I think they're worth engaging with, and so I think that's a much more interesting way to sort of look at the chupacabras and El Chupacabras in Puerto Rico than to just be like, oh, they just all saw this movie and they thought they were seeing it in real life. It's like, okay, well, let's say that there's something a little bit more of something happening here.
Yeah, it's more like they gave life to it, possibly. Like it, I think it's just hard for people to grasp, like people who don't have that imagination, ironically enough, to like be like, oh, maybe that is possible. Well,
I mean, and let's be fair, like these are unfalsifiable ideas. Like, we'll probably never know if these ideas are true. So I understand people's hesitancy to engage with them, but I just feel like there is such a compulsion in all these fields to someday be able to tell the skeptics, told you so. And because of that, there's this hesitancy to step outside of this like real scientific, we've got to be able to prove it. We've got to write the papers and we've got to, bag it and tag it in the case of cryptozoology. And, I think that kind of in some instances has held back these disciplines for a long time.
Well, here's a sort of odd little side road to go down. I don't know if you even explore it in the book, to be quite honest, because this didn't really kind of start bothering me till after I was prepared to do the show. So I'd have to go back and look in the notes. But AI, I'm getting creeped out by this AI now, and we're talking sort of about the language of ideas in a way, and sort of the science of ideas and imagination, and sort of that ether realm of like thought and creativity and everything. And it's like the concern, obviously, is that this thing is like taking the agency away from us under, and the Trojan horse, I think, way of being like, we're going to make it easier for you. Like, we can write the stories for you. We can make the art for you. And it's like, I don't know, dude, this could be fucking really bad for us. Because maybe we need that maybe that's a completely underrated part of our fucking existence. Again, going back almost to these stories are recipes and things like that. It's like, I don't know, man. We don't, I don't know if we want like a fucking robot in the kitchen.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of different ways to look at this. One is to say that there is or is going to be some sort of ghost in the machine, right? That there are instances, not every instance, but there are instances where these large language models are sort of tapping into that same imaginal place that we do, right? Like maybe there's something about, there's an idea that Miguel Romero, a Red Pill Junkie, has said to me sometimes, is that like, what if systems of sufficient complexity sort of invite consciousness into them like a lightning rod, right? So it's not like consciousness is specific to human brains, but like if you could build a mechanical version of the human brain that's just as complex, it would act as a receiver of consciousness, right? I mean, like if you think about like brains being receivers of consciousness, and like how televisions are like, the TV show is not in the television, it's receiving it. Like, okay, well, there are other ways you could watch that if you have this. So maybe something like that might go on too. But like, yeah, the idea of outsourcing this creative impulse is concerning for a lot of different reasons. I think that, I think that we have been so used to faculties atrophying when we hand them off to machines, right? Like,
yeah.
And but most of those have been like, oh, I can't do math as well, or oh, I can't remember, my parents' phone number. But like outsourcing imagination is a whole nother thing that we haven't really done.
Yeah.
We've outsourced like menial labor and difficult tasks, but we haven't outsourced like the sort of leisure aspect. And yeah, I think that like seems like everything else, if you use it or lose it, right? So I kind of wonder. Yeah, I do wonder in that regard. I think that if I'm going to suggest that reality is somehow managed or stage managed, or that this narratological or textual version of reality is a good way to approach life. Like, I have to wonder if there's not a reason that I wrote Fourth Wall Phantoms when I did, which is in the age of AI, I mean, because I mentioned earlier how people were seeing Adamski scout ships and the Ed Walters Gulf Breeze UFO, in real life experiences. Like, people are going to see something and then they're later going to see an AI image and be like, oh, that was the thing that I saw. Like, that's going to happen if it hasn't happened already. And so it's that same idea of like, well, is this phenomenon sort of borrowing on some of what our culture has created, even if it's this AI stuff? I mean,
well, like, what about this, right? You're talking about authors creating characters and, the characters come to life, right? What the fuck happens when the author is the AI?
Right?
Can it do that? Can it create characters that fucking transcend? And could it be so smart? I'm gonna fucking scare people. Could it be so smart that it knows how to fucking do it? You know what I'm saying? Where you're like a regular author who's like, it's the craziest thing. This thing happened to me, but the AI is like, oh, I got.
This is how you do that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's
well,
like,
I mean,
I just manifested your worst, whatever.
Here's the really weird thing, Tim, that's going to get like the simulationist theory people all excited. But Tim Renner mentioned this to me at one point, and then somebody else mentioned it to me, and I'm like, that's a really good point. So you remember, it's gotten better, but like, remember how like the early AIs like had trouble with like fingers?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really weird. Like, is that why we see Bigfoot prints that only have like 3 toes? Like, is it the same thing? Or like, or there's this tradition that you have, and like you see it in European fairy traditions, but you also see it in Islamic traditions regarding the jinn, that they'll be perfect, or they'll be like a human being except for one thing that isn't right or isn't quite right. And it's the exact same thing that we saw with AI, and I wonder if that's like not a hint that like there's a similar mechanism or something.
Sounds kind of similar, like Men in Black too. Yeah, aren't they?
Yeah,
and a little
like,
bit. Yeah.
At the end of the day, like both AI and UFOs. I mean, there are non-human intelligences that are capable of blurring the lines between fact and fiction. So I think that it's sort of you probably have this sort of sense that like I do, which is like there's some sort of link here that I don't think has been fully articulated yet. And yeah, it's unsettling. Like it concerns me a great deal. But I guess we're going with it. So
yeah, I mean,
we'll see where it goes.
Just one of many fucking things.
Here's the thing that will be interesting to see with the more creative large language models is that like I think that there is something intrinsically human about the unintuitive decision, or like when you're watching a movie and you're like, oh, they made this choice. Like that was a choice. That was a really weird choice that they made.
Right.
And it shouldn't work. There's probably stacks of studio notes saying don't do this, but the director was like, no, I'm doing it anyway, and it totally works. I don't know if AI will be able to do that. When AI
can,
And I think that's that sort of like where do ideas come from kind of thing. I think it's a similar mechanism going on there, right? When AI does do that, that's where we're in trouble. When it like throws a curveball and you're like, oh, this totally works. That's when it's like, oh no, we really have completely outsourced this aspect of ourselves to the machine.
That's true. Yeah. Well, for now, it has to feed off of us and our ideas. So that's the other. Yeah. It's scary. I read like a weird paper the other day that was like, this could all go completely haywire in like 3 fucking years. Not like, this thing could snow, like this thing gets so much faster and faster every day that it's like, oh shit, they're not going to be able to control this. It's going to get accidentally out of their control very fast. But I try not to worry about it.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't.
I already believe, not to get too deep into this, we're way off of the book, but like I already kind of believe like the Bitcoin, the fucking like those huge server things they have everywhere. Part of me's like, I think I talked about this with Red Pill Junkie. It's like part of me wonders, are we already captured by the fucking machine and we don't even know it yet? Like we live on the internet. We're fucking building all these giant computers. AI uses all this water and shit, I guess. Where's that coming from?
Well, here's the thing. Like, algorithms already subtly manipulate us throughout the day, right?
Right.
Dude, I mean, like there's this thing that I learned in journalism school where it's like some ridiculous number, like 90% of people believe that advertisements don't work on them, but like something like 70% of people are influenced by advertisements. Like we all think that we're like, oh no, I'm not influenced by this dishwasher detergent ad, but there is a psychological component to it as well that sort of does have that sort of it sort of plays on that. And algorithms nudge us in the same way, with whether it's pushing you towards more and more extreme content online or something like that. We're already being manipulated in that sense by the algorithm. So like, yeah, I mean, we could already be subtly doing things for the will of the AI that we don't even realize, and that we won't even realize. But like, things don't need to necessarily even go full Skynet to completely be bleak.
Yeah.
It can just.
Well, it's already fucking bleak because you can't.
Oh, it's already bleak. Yeah. I mean, it's already bleak in terms of the way that like it's just decimating certain sectors,
even worse than it was before. Like I thought reality was fractured. Now reality is like fractured and I don't even know.
Yeah, and it kills me because like I'm not going to sit here and say that like it has no utility because like there are so many uses for it to like see patterns where we don't see patterns, and like
it's tremendously helpful in some ways.
It could literally be like, oh, the cure for cancer is to sit outside on the 13th of every month and drink a mint julep, and like like these weird patterns that we would never see. It's able to like be like to sort of draw these conclusions in interesting ways. So there's a utility for it. Just don't put it in the creative side of things, please.
Yeah. It's a little bit like sugar or something, where it's like it's good in the hands of someone who's cooking a meal, but it's like maybe we shouldn't just put this in fucking everything. But it's interesting to get back to the idea of like stories conjuring reality in a sense, or physicality. I was thinking about I did an interview a long time ago with the guy who invented television, and it was like he invented it in a way. He came up with a way to do it because he was not schooled, so he didn't really know. No one told him that you couldn't do it that way, so he ended up, and that's how it worked. But I think, in a way, almost the reverse could be said when we're talking about what you've written about in Fourth Wall Phantoms, in a way where it's like maybe, and I guess what brought me to this idea was like people who say they like interact with Bigfoot and they're like friendly with Bigfoot, but it's like maybe like the idea. And I don't know, that may have come from Harry and the Hendersons, I guess, in a sense, is what I'm saying, or just any kind of like fictional account of like friendly Bigfoot. And it's like maybe it just like maybe once the idea got into people's heads, different people, when it became possible, that's possible that you can be friendly with Bigfoot, even if it's in a movie or a fiction. They go, I wonder if that would be possible, or and then their imagination starts, and then that manifests. I wonder if that's part of it.
Well, I mean, so. A lot of what I'm doing in Fourth Wall Phantoms is somewhat familiar ground, right? Because this has been talked about a lot in the UFO circles, right? Greg's talked about co-creation. Bertrand Mayust is a scholar who's talked about how a lot of the alien abduction stuff and UFO stuff, especially that early saucer era, like is picking stuff up straight from the sci-fi pulps in like really subtle ways, like it's manifesting, right? So it's been talked about a little bit in the UFO area. I don't think anyone has taken it and applied it to parapsychology as much as I do in this, but very few people have really talked about like how culture seems to impact the way that we deal with cryptids, right?
Yeah.
And to that extent, I think that you're right about that. Like I think that there are things like Bigfoot get more and less, their character changes as our culture's view of them changes, right? You know what I mean? And to that extent, like I'm not sure if you remember or you got to this point in the book where I argue that most of modern day thinking on Bigfoot is related to Predator.
Predator.
Yeah, 100%. Like
okay.
So we were making this Ben Radford Chupacabras thing, right? Like maybe
that was an iconic movie. That was like that was a big time film. I'm
telling you. So this is a bit of a problematic thing to say because like a lot of these Bigfoot stories predate the 1987 sci-fi classic Predator, but stick with me on this. Because again, if ideas have people, then ideas are timeless. So,
right.
Number one, I think Predator and Harry and the Hendersons are 3 months apart in terms of when they were released.
Interesting.
Kevin Peter Hall played the Predator, and Harry and the Hendersons was played by Kevin Peter Hall.
The same actor?
Same actor, yeah.
Whoa, that's weird.
He was 7'2". The average height, according to the BFRO for Bigfoot, was 7'10". Bigfoot have been reported to have dreadlocks like the Predator character does. That's a thing you hear. People describe Bigfoot jumping from tree to tree. That's a thing you hear. Bigfoot glides through the forest a lot like the Predator does. Bigfoot and Predator have superhuman strength. Bigfoot and Predator arguably have an association with UFOs. The Predator shoots this shoulder cannon that has this ball of light, kind of like the Bigfoot and ball of light stories. Predator's vision has this droning sound underneath. Whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
I've recorded stories of buzzing and humming and things compared to didgeridoo sounds in conjunction with predators. They're all over where the footprints end. Predator sees in infrared. What do you hear the Bigfooters saying now about why we never catch Bigfoot on trail cams? I think they can see in infrared or detect infrared. They said the same thing. Bigfoot and Predator are resistant to firearms. How does Predator lure in his prey in the movies? He mimics them. I have an entire chapter on Bigfoot mimicking human beings in Where the Footprints End. People say that Bigfoot can remove spines. Like that's something you see, in Predator as well. But the thing that kills me is cloaking Bigfoot, dude.
Right? Yeah.
People say that Bigfoot can cloak, and what do they compare it to every single time? They always compare it to Predator. They say it looks like the shimmer, like a scene from Predator, like time and time again. I even found a story from someone who was a Predator witness and said like they got PTSD watching Predator in the theaters because it resembled Bigfoot so much.
Wow.
That they were like, it moves like Bigfoot. It looks like Bigfoot, like all this stuff. That's a lot of things to be in common with the way some people think of Bigfoot and Predator. So like, does that mean that Predator is a part of our culture so much that like every time you get a bunch of Bigfooters in the woods, they're like, oh, they starting to feel like they're Arnold Schwarzenegger and they're, they're being Is that what that means? I don't know. But it seems like there is some sort of influence there. I would suggest that there might be something to the Bigfoot phenomenon sort of adopting those cultural expectations.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of. Yes,
just like the UFO seems to change over time, right? The UFO and its occupants are always evolving, always changing. I think that maybe Bigfoot does that some too, and it's picking up on these aspects of Predator because that's so specific. Like, oh, they see an infrared, and oh, they can cloak, and like it's way too many specific things that for me to say that there's nothing there. Like that's seeing an infrared and cloaking and. And then the real cherry on top is Kevin Peter Hall playing both those characters 3 months apart. It
is pretty wild. That's interesting. So cultural expectations and sort of people, being open to ideas. Like ideas come out, and then people are like, "Oh, that could be," and then it like that opens the door. Or I think you said the fourth wall was a door. I think you said.
Yeah. So it
opens the door to like okay.
Yeah, it's this idea that like neither of these things are static, right? Like our sightings influence our fictions in our media, and our fictions and our media influence our sightings. And I think it just goes around and around and around because I mentioned so this discussion happening in the UFO space, and somebody who I have a great amount of admiration for, Martin Kottmeyer, has talked about like it seems like the Greys are a product of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and it's like, well, yeah, but you can go back further and like see like those same descriptions of fairies in a book from 1940 something being large-headed and goggle-eyed and emaciated.
Yeah.
So but then you can go further back, and I'm sure you're going to find another bit of fiction that depicts them that way. And you keep on going round and round and round until I think really what you do is you wind up at like petroglyphs and rock art. It's like, well, what was this? Was this art? Or was it a document of what really happened? Or like, is there any way to ever tell? So, the chicken or the egg, I don't know. But there does seem to like neither of these things exist in a vacuum. They're constantly interplaying with each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like I said, it feels like another dimensional thing that's like kind of like right beside us, but we can't see it. Like I said, maybe it's the audience, man. Maybe it's the audience. It's kind of an interesting, it's just hard to fathom in a lot of ways. Yeah.
And then like this is all of everything that we're saying here is like this is all from like a Western perspective. Like this is without even getting into, a lot of indigenous perspectives on the division between fact and fiction, which like in some cultures arguably doesn't really even exist at all. I did find a really interesting and sort of compelling idea. Daniel Everett, he's a linguist, spent a lot of time with the Piraha tribe in the Amazon. And he said that he ended up losing his religion because like they were like the ultimate empiricists. And he said he noticed that they kept on using this word before they would say something like Ibupiu. Like, he Ibupiu went away in his canoe. He Ibupiu went into the forest. This and that and the other. And he found out that like what it was is that there was like some sort of weirdly huge exponential number of ways that you could conjugate this word Ibupiu, but what it basically boiled down to was telling you how you learned about this. So like, I saw him go into the forest with my own eyes. I heard about him going into the forest. I inferred that he went into the forest. Like, you don't just say he went into the forest. Like, it's always got this qualifier of how you learned about this information.
Interesting.
Ibupiu. What is really interesting to me, two things. Number one, he said that they always so pointedly challenged where you found out about information, to the extent that he actually went there originally as a missionary, and he decided that he wasn't going to be a Christian because he hadn't seen Jesus and his dad hadn't seen Jesus and he didn't know anybody who'd seen Jesus. So how do you know Jesus was real, right? So he ended up losing his religion because of how emphatic the Piraha tribe is about getting their information, right? But here's the weird thing. The Piraha have a spiritual belief system. Like, of course they do, right? So what does that mean? Like, what are they interacting with that's so convincing to them that they say that they don't discount it, because they do have that sort of like firsthand knowledge of where things come from? And this really confronted him one day, because he was getting ready to leave, I think, in a boat, and his language teacher came up and said, "No, you can't go into the forest because the sky people are gonna say they're gonna kill you if you go into the forest today." And he's like, "I don't see them. Like, they're right over there," and he didn't see them at all. It gets a little bit more interesting when you consider the fact that Daniel Everett, had a flashlight that ran out of batteries, and so he lit a match. And some of the people in the tribe actually said, as the match was flickering in and out, the match is Ibupiuing. It is going in and out of existence. So we have this idea of, saying exactly where you know about things from, and being like really consistent with where your information comes from. Coming from a tribe that still believes in a spirit world, and saying that like these things sort of wink in and out of existence. And I think that this is a really useful idea for us in the paranormal, by which I mean, when these things happen, you're not going to make them any less real when they're happening, right? It's happening. Like, it is happening. You did see a werewolf, or you did see, Batman, or you did see a UFO. Like, that is real in that moment. And the moment it's out of sight, it doesn't make it any more real. So it's a thing of the moment, right? It's almost like saying, is the tornado real, Tim? Like, well, I mean, yeah, but there aren't any tornadoes in the U.S. right now, right? Like, there's no tornadoes right now. So, okay, well, then tornadoes aren't real. No, they are real. They, under certain conditions, like, they are real for a period of time,
exactly.
And then they go away.
That's a great example, yeah.
And I think that, again, I'm not saying any of this is accurate or correct in terms of how we should or we should view the paranormal, or it's really what's going on. But I think it's a useful way to think about these things. Like, yeah, this person really did have this batshit crazy, insane encounter in this 1 5-minute period. It was absolutely real. Doesn't mean it's real any longer, but for that one period, it was real. And I think that's an interesting way to possibly look at this, to sort of take a lot of the pressure we feel off of these experiences, and like, well, what's about the truth? And this is way too crazy of a story, and all this and that, the other. It was real for those moments, in that fleeting moment, and then it stopped. Yeah. I think there's maybe a lesson in that.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me a lot of those Celia Edgar stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of these brief moments in time when weird shit happened, and people were like interacting with like a Sandown clown or some of the other characters in the book.
Well, how many times have you heard this? Like, it's like, oh, it felt like I was for the period of time that I saw this thing, it was like I was in a bubble universe, or I was like, I'd stepped into another dimension, or something like that. It feels like it's sectioned off in that way. And I feel like that maybe that, for all we know, that's a more accurate description of what's happening than we really appreciate.
Well, it's also interesting, stepping back from the AI thing, but it is interesting too that there's just more stuff, like more, if we're talking about stories being alive and conjuring shit, it is kind of remarkable. There's way more, I feel like there's way more media than ever before. So one would imagine we would see maybe more of this.
Right. And that's, that's always been one of my sort of things that I struggle with there are two things that I struggle with we talked about tulpas and thought forms and stuff like that, right? Well, the first one is people think about Luke Skywalker more than most things, you know?
Right.
They think about Darth Vader and, you know, Iron Man more than a lot of things, that more than UFOs and more than Bigfoot, right? So why don't we have them walking down the street, you know? Like if what is required is intense focus to make these things appear, then why don't we have those, you know, everywhere?
Well, maybe if it's like, maybe if the character's origin is like it begins as fiction, it's harder for it to manifest. But you know, when an author is sort of creating the character, it's a different sort of thing because they're the creator.
And that's the other sort of hiccup that I have in the tulpa idea is like the idea of the tulpa is so at least as presented in Alexander David Neal's work, is so personal. Like you have to put in a lot of thought and focus on this thing to make it real, which means that it makes perfect sense why an author would see their character. I totally, it makes sense. But like, why does a welder in Casey, Iowa see someone else's character? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
This person who would describe themselves as not necessarily creative. I mean, I think everybody's creative, but you know what I mean? Like, they would describe themselves as not a creative person, and yet they see somebody else's creation. Like, why would that even be a thing? You know, I don't know what to make of that. But yeah, you're right. It might be that like certain ideas have an easier. Well, this seems to be sort of obvious on its face, right? Certain ideas have an easier time of entering this world, right? Like, yeah, and obviously they do, because like I can make a really crappy doodle right now, you know. I can't do the Last Supper right now, but I can I can make a really crappy doodle right now. So yeah, some ideas do have an easier time entering into this world, and maybe if they've already been thought of or presented, like you were saying, like that could be the case.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. What's been the response to the book so far?
Like I said, if it's for you, it's right up your alley, and if it's not for you, it's kind of like oh boy. But for the most part, it's been really positive, and it's I'm especially grateful for that, because like so much of like the tone is like there's a lot of me in there, like I'm got a lot of opinions, and like it's I try to be kind of funny and cheeky, and like I said, there's almost a memoir sort of aspect of it where I'm just like, this is something that I kind of think might be happening because I have a hard time explaining it otherwise. So people, it's and that constitutes a pretty abrupt change for me. So in that sense, it's been a lot more receptive than I could have hoped for, and I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, I think that as with all of my other stuff, like there are some ideas in here that like I would love to see somebody else take and expand upon, like do something with it that I could have never done, you know, because of my own limitations. But yeah.
Well, the book is monstrous. I feel like if I was going to give you any advice, I would have just fucking split this into like 3 books. Like you put a lot of book there. Like you probably had 2 or 3 different books in there. You could have put together, but it's you know, the winner of that scenario is the reader, of course, because they get all of it in one shot. But
I mean that's
damn Cutch.
there are so many logistical problems like in putting out a book that is this long. Number one, like this is roughly 3 times the length of a Trojan Feast. So that means like in the amount of time it takes me to proofread this once, I could have proofread it 3 times if it was longer than Trojan Feast. Yeah. You know, and there's some physical limitations. Like I'm pretty sure I couldn't have made it much larger without the book falling apart. And so yeah, I mean that's part of my goal moving forward is like, you know, I sort of made I got into this really looking at like really small specific things and like doing comparisons, like, you know, the food book or the smell book, like really like niche projects. And that's where I'd like to, well, I say that, put a pin in that for the moment, but that's what I really like to sort of return to for a lot of my books in the future, is like really getting back into those smaller things and saying like, what can this one small thing teach us about the paranormal in general. Having said that, I am at work on the most challenging thing that I've done in a while, which is
Jesus.
this book on unexplained light phenomena with Barbara Fisher.
Yeah.
Barbara's a dear friend. She's been an editor on my last 3 projects. But she's wanted to write like sort of the definitive guide to anomalous lights. And anomalous lights appear in everything.
I know. It's such a really...
like there's a reason no one's written this before. So I'm not exaggerating. Like Barbara and I have about, it might be over 1,000 pages of notes typed out. It's probably less than that, but yeah, I mean, it's going to have to be split into 2 books, I think, because it's just such a massive amount of material. But we when you end up, because like Barb was just like really obsessive about going through this stuff and like finding like, if there, I don't think there's, I mean, there are a lot of books on light phenomena, but like I think she's read like most of the things that have been written, and because she's been so dedicated to sort of reading all that I think she's pulled out some really interesting observations that people haven't made in the past before. So I'm eager to see those get out there. But in the meantime, we've got to write the damn book. So
yeah, it sounds like quite a challenge. That's very. I wouldn't necessarily even call it niche. Very broad topic. So it's like, it's tough.
It's going to have to be split into several volumes, I think. But so yeah, lesson learned. So to be more accurate about returning to small, concise books, my own personal mission for my next solo book is to return to small, concise books. And I have I've probably got about 3 or 4 other projects that I've got lined up. It's just a matter of finding the time to sit down and complete the research and writing them. But there are sort of smaller topic ideas. Yeah, this was sort of my last, Ecology of Souls was big. And then this was like, okay, this is sort of the follow-up where I'm like, and this might be how reality works. Now, can I please go home now and go back to the small stuff, please?
Yeah, it's very, It's a lot.
It's intimidating. It's intimidating.
It is. I've been intimidated about even doing the show, but
I know. And you've been very kind to indulge me with my ranting and raving and my.
Well, I've enjoyed it because I enjoy the sort of theory discussion. That's why I felt bad when you were like, "There's stories in there. It's chock full of stories. He's got all these examples and stuff." But I'm kind of hooked on the broader sort of like. Like I said, it's kind of like you're up here. It's like when you go to the factory and you get to, and they have the glass window or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you can kind of look in at the factory a little bit and see what's going on in there, but you can't go in the fucking.
Well, and you also know that if you opened up the machines that are working in the factory, you'd just be confused by everything you see in there. You'd be like, wow, I have no idea how that works. I'm going to close that back up. Yeah. I mean, this has easily been the hardest book to talk about. Because so many of the ideas are abstract, and they do have these bigger and broader implications.
It involves language itself, so it's like very difficult to really even kind of wrap your arms around.
Yeah, I mean that's a suspicion that I have is that how many times towards the end of the book there's one of my 3 conclusions, 3 concluding chapters, right? I literally have 3 concluding chapters. One of them is that the same space that artists go to and get inspiration from is the same space in which paranormal events happen, because art conveys what language cannot. And how many times have you heard people in these experiences say I can't put it into words. It defies language. Words escape me. That's the thing they keep on saying over and over again. And I think that, I make an argument that that's what's happening, is that the imaginal space is the space of artistic inspiration, is the space of spirit, is the space of the paranormal. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Small concepts like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I don't want to put you on the spot here. I'll actually make this a little personal myself, but I do want to salute you or commend you, I guess is probably the more appropriate word, just for being so transparent and open about your alcohol battles, and as people listen to the show, they're like, oh, Binnall, he's a crazy fucker, he's always, and it's like, folks, I struggle with alcohol. Haven't you figured that out yet? Like, Jesus Christ. So Cutch has been a huge help for me over the years to try and contain these fucking demons. I try to drown them, folks, but my demons, they can swim. So it's not positives, but you've been a huge help for me. And I really was like, when I was reading the book, I was like, oh wow, Cutch he's going there. That takes a lot of bravery to open yourself up like that. So I was really blown away by that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. And like, there are a couple of different reasons for that. Like, part of me was like kind of afraid to do it, not because like, oh, I don't want to share this part of myself, but like, I don't want people to be like, oh, is this going to be a sob story about like,
yeah.
About, but at the same time, like, what got me out of that situation and what sort of kept me sober was sort of a lot of the seeds were that sort of germinated into this book. So specifically, like, the idea of being able to view one's life or one's missteps or like, it's like the record scratch, right? I was like, how did I get here?
Right.
That's me. It's like when you have those moments, like what can you do in that moment? And for me, it was like, it was Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell were the ones who like, so helped me to see, like, plot out where I was and what I could and should do next. So I wanted to include that for like for the practical application of some of the lessons that I took out of Fourth Wall Phantoms about like reality functioning like a narrative. But also, look, there were some crazy ass synchronicities that popped off around.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Around the time of that. Yeah. And, I think it's part of what I ended up going through. I mean, like, so this didn't make it into the book because I found out about it later, but my friend Laura, is working on a book about the birth charts, astrological birth charts of people who have near-death experiences. And she's found a marker in it that like suggests that people who either write about near-death experiences or have near-death experiences have this birth marker, right? Like there's something in their chart that says that they'll have a near-death experience.
Oh, weird. Really?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like exciting, groundbreaking stuff. And I can't wait for her. She's writing a book and I can't wait for her to come out with it.
That's interesting.
But here's where it gets really interesting is that she says that like, and again, like I know just enough about astrology to be dangerous. So like, I can't tell you exactly what she has pinpointed or anything, but like she says that moment that I checked myself into rehab was like one of those things where it was like, oh, that was when you were supposed to have your near-death experience, Josh.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. Because I talked to her, about, having this marker on my chart for, because I wrote Ecology of Souls, and that's about near-death. So people who also research it also have this marker as well. But she was like, that was when you're supposed to have that. And so like you took the voluntary version, as opposed to like the involuntary. You took the easy way out as opposed to the hard way out. So I think
it's
that's
not
probably
like Final Destination, is it?
Well, I mean, kind of. I mean, but the good news is that if you're fated to have a near-death experience, it's going to be a near-death experience. Yeah, exactly right. Wow. I think that explains sort of, for me, to my satisfaction, why I had some of those synchronicities is because it was sort of that rebirth, death, rebirth, sort of learning lesson moment. But yeah, so I wanted to commit that to the record as well. Some of those synchronicities and some of that experience, and also, it seemed appropriate for me to write a book about Fourth Wall Phantoms and to have my own voice in there. Yeah, to break the fourth wall. Yeah, exactly. So that seemed like a natural way to sort of put myself in there without, being like, "Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm going to talk to you today." Yeah, sort of providing some context with that aspect of my life. So I really appreciate it, man. If anybody ever wants to talk to me about their own struggles, just reach out.
Yeah, like I said, you've been a huge help for me, man. So,
well, anybody listening too. So, yeah.
And while we're staying on the deeply personal, in light of what you've written in the book, I know that this is a case that you struggled with for a very long time. Now, based on what you've uncovered in the book, has your opinion changed on Normie, the Lake Norman monster? Could he become a fictional incursion?
Well, yeah, I mean, no, it's totally softened. Like that's what I love. And that's what I love kind of about this, although it's kind of what terrifies me about this line of thinking is that, is that oh well, there's no pressure for any of these counterpoints to really matter in some instances. Like, well, it just happened. It just is. It just does, like that's really kind of cool. It's the Ibupio, right? Like they're there one moment and then they aren't. Like it doesn't, I don't care if Lake Norman was man-made and my father played on the bottom of Lake Norman and there's no way that a man-made lake has a monster. For the moment that someone saw this monster, there was a monster, and then there wasn't a monster. Like I love that. That's really refreshing to look at things that way. Yeah. I will say that working on this book sort of has backed me into like some really uncomfortable places where like I found myself towards the end of it hearing things like the Lake Norman monster and being like, well, I don't care what's true and what's a hoax and what's BS and what's a lie. Like it's all real. It doesn't matter to me anymore. And like, that's sort of where you wind up. And it's like, that's a weird place to be. And like, it's not a place that you can write books about from in the future. Like you can't write.
Yes. That's, I was thinking that earlier, not about you, but yes, it's like in this, when you get into this, you have to have like a grounding point or something. Cause like, I was thinking earlier, it's like, okay, maybe we are the characters and maybe there is an audience, but folks, don't go out and fucking live your life like you're in the fucking Truman Show. Cause social media lets people do that, which is the frightening other part of it. But don't go out and be like, hey, I'm good. Like stay in reality with us.
And you've met these people too, who do the fourth wall breaks to an invisible camera. Like you've met people like that, and it's like that's no. I even say towards the end of the book, like I do think that like just about anything that we deem impossible is possible, but that doesn't mean you should go jump off the roof. Like, don't jump off the roof, please. Like, because I think there are certain tendencies that reality does have, strong tendencies that reality does have. But yeah, I mean, I kind of wound up towards the end of this book being like, well, everything's fair game. It doesn't, I don't, and look, I think I'll always retain some of that. Like we've discussed this a bit because we've been doing some, we've been trying to plan for future trips and doing some.
Yeah, we're gonna get
taking a look at at legend tripping and stuff like that. And it's like, no, there wasn't a woman in white who was buried in her wedding gown at this cemetery. Like, and you can probably go into the historical record and the city archives and find out that story is completely fabricated and it's demonstrably false. But I think people can see a woman in white at that cemetery because of the power of that archetype and the power of that story and whatnot, So I think that's a good lesson to take away. But like in the sense of like really not caring whether stuff is a hoax or not, like that's not a stance that I can embrace in the future going forward. But I am much more charitable towards the idea of the Lake Norman monster because of the fact that like, why not? Like I talk about goofier shit in the book,
Right. Well, just to go on a side tangent before we go, when you mentioned the woman in white and the whole thing like that, part of the thing too is very often things happen. People see these things, the anomalous, and they're often people like who not necessarily are aware of the story of the woman in white, like the old stories. The guy picks up the hitchhiker or whatever, and that kind of thing. It's like maybe the idea becomes, for lack of a better term, like the stone tape theory. Like just as the idea promulgates, in the collective consciousness and the zeitgeist of even a small local zeitgeist, it becomes, I laugh about this with Daniel Weiss talking about the ghost hunting community. Everything's energy. It's this mysterious energy, right? But maybe it is like this stone tape. You can conjure the stone tape phenomenon by way of the collective zeitgeist.
Well, I mean,
like it's still kind of real.
Well, I mean, look, if we think of like, if we think of the stone tape theory as actually having a basis, like, okay, yeah, the stones can record historical events and they can also record fictions, right? Like just like a real tape, like a real recording can record what happens in the room between me and you talking, and they can also record a story that I tell, So I think that there's something to that. And, I do talk about that. Like I have a section in the parapsychology chapter talking about like these sort of weird boilerplates that you run into, which I kind of ran into one of them with you. We went to Trans-Allegheny and they were talking about this crawler, this black crawler
Yeah, you
figure on
mentioned
the
that
third or
earlier,
fourth floor or whatever. And like the fourth floor crawler is something that I can think of as being something at least 2 other sites, besides there. And like, what is that? Like, why is that that's so weirdly specific, that like upper floor black crawling thing that crawls on the walls and the ceiling? Like, why? What is that? And yet, like, it seems to appear in different places all at once without stories being told and shared. So like it doesn't feel like an archetype because it's not like fleshed out like an archetype is.
Right. It's just a phenomenon.
So yeah, it's like a boiler. It's like a boilerplate is what I end up calling it. It's like a paranormal boilerplate.
Yeah. And the last thing before we go, you teased the Barbara Fisher book, and you're working a bunch of other stuff. And JoshuaCutchins.com is the website. And what's the YouTube one you write for?
What Lurks Beneath. Yeah, and I there a good number of those scripts are mine, although my boss Josh also writes his scripts as well. But yeah, some of what I do makes it on there.
All right. Okay.
Oh, do you want? Should I say where you can see me?
Oh yeah, I was gonna just get into the Bigfoot thing. So just
okay. Yeah.
As we joked when we started the anniversary special, was like you start out with the big news. So we'll leave them tonight, relatively, with a cliffhanger here, because you're going to be hearing more from Josh. You're going to be hearing from Steve and I as we get closer to this thing. We'll probably do some joint episode, or Steve's show, or a BOA, and we'll probably do shit like, maybe even while we're down there, not necessarily in the woods, but just hanging around. Who knows? But you're going to be hearing a lot more about what we're going to be getting up to later this year. But I just wanted to plant this seed. This has come up from other people I've talked to lately too, but it's like, we need to consider, we're going to be walking around in the woods, presumably looking for the Bigfoot, but we need to also consider maybe some kind of like meditative channeling moment. Some, but maybe not even so overthought, but we need to consider the idea that like this could be manifested somehow, but not in the, but almost, I don't want to overthink it, but I want to put that into your head. And if Steve's listening, so we'll talk to Steve about this later, but like, I have my own thoughts about that.
Not the least of which is that you're like one of the most powerful magicians I've ever met, because you just, you just go through life and, you have a natural charisma that makes me think, as Ren said, that you're the most.
I can tell you right now what's going to happen. We're going to see Bigfoot, but we're going to see Bigfoot in like the worst possible, like, or unexpected way. I'm going to be like, I got to take a shit, whatever. It's going to be like a situation where it's like, we got to go back to town because
the story is going to be embarrassing to retell.
Yes. It'll be a story. It'll be a story where we aren't expecting to see Bigfoot.
Yeah.
We're distracted by something else that is ridiculous, where it's like, I dropped my fucking phone back there in the woods. We got to go like that. I talked to Brick Moreland, had a story like that, but I think it's going to be something like that. And we'll encounter it. If we do, it'll be a situation where we least expect it.
Well,
and are distracted, like when you look at the painting at the dentist's office, and it's like you got to blur your eyes.
So I have this suspicion / hope that the fact that we get along so well, and we're doing this primarily to see each other, like the Bigfoot outing is kind of secondary. I think a lot of the reason that we're getting together is to see each other and to have fun. I find that detail encouraging for one of the reasons that I mentioned in Fourth Wall Phantoms. There's that famous Herbert Schirmer quote that he says that the aliens, when he asked them what they wanted, they said, "We want you to believe in us, but not too much." And I can't help but find some similarities between that and what was revealed in the Philip experiment, the Toronto parapsychologist who came up with this entire fictional backstory for someone who lived in the English Civil War. And then basically they made up a person and then had a seance and asked a ghost to answer the questions, and the responses that they got back with raps and knocks and such correctly confirmed details of Philip's fictional life. So yeah, it's Fourth Wall Phantoms territory, right? But the thing that was noted in that was that the more serious and like the more stuffy they were about the proceedings, the worst results they had. They seemed to get the best results when they were like chummy and lighthearted and stuff like that. So that I like to put that in I like to juxtapose that with the Herbert Schirmer believe in us but not too much. That's sort of lighthearted aspect of it.
I like that.
I think that's something that the three of us, me and you and Steve, will capture quite easily that weekend.
Good energy to have.
Yeah, that's good energy to have. Yeah, because most of the times I go out to look for this stuff, I'm like, very, very serious, and I'm stroking my chin, and I'm like, I'm thinking about the worst case scenario, and I might be armed or something. And this is just going to be us having fun first and foremost. And I think that's the sort of scenario where we might be able to sort of manifest something. So yeah, I've got some other ideas too. But yeah.
Awesome. All right. So, and this is coming out like in early July. So what do you got coming up for speaking engagements and things you want to plug?
Yeah, I have two things coming up real quick. The first one is at the end of July, technically August 1st and August 2nd at Paracon, Kansas City. That's paraconkc.com. Just a great lineup of speakers, a real laid back, I know some of the stuff that's planned, and it's just going to be a really fun time, and that's in Kansas City. Technically, it's in Leavenworth, Kansas, so that's August 1st and 2nd. That's paraconkc.com. And then at the end of the month in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, I will be at the Cape Paracon with some names that will be familiar to the show, like Micah Hanks and Tim Renner and Tobias Wayland. And so it'll be a good time. And that website is SEMO mysticevents.com. That's the Cape Girardeau Paranormal Convention 2025. And that is at the end of August. It's the 30th and 31st. So those are all the official things that are coming up soon. I have some other stuff towards the end of the year that hopefully I'll be announcing soon whenever the paperwork gets signed. But in the meantime, there's that, and then Bigfoot, and I'm thrilled.
Cutch is finally going to adopt me, folks.
It's true. Why not? Why the hell not?
All right, man. Well, it's fucking almost midnight here with all the chatting earlier and the technical difficulties. It's got a long fucking evening. I've enjoyed it so much, brother. I love you so much. The book it's a tour de force amongst so many. I mean, your career is tremendous. I really do hold you in the highest regard. I think like that your stuff's going to last beyond, for generations. It's that kind of like transformative material. There's so much shit out there that's just like so fucking redundant that it's ridiculous. And everything you every time up, dude, you come up with some kind of unique slant on shit that your catalog is really, I wouldn't say second to none, but it's in the pantheon of like you need this guy's catalog of shit.
Well, I really appreciate that, man.
And it's only getting better and longer and bigger as the years go by. Like the shit, you could have just rested on your laurels with Trojan Feast and fucking been that guy for you really could have for 5 years and then done another book, and then 5 years later you're like, then you do a third, but you churn out so much material, man. It's really impressive, and I envy you, man. I really do. And the quality of thought and research, it really is tremendous, man. You should be very proud of yourself. You've built quite a career here, man.
Thank you. That means a lot. And yeah, I try to have something worth saying whenever I say it. So it's nice. It's nice to know that that's been noticed. I appreciate that, buddy. It means the world to me. And like with you, man, it's always a pleasure to get to talk. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the rest of this year. And thanks everybody for listening. Oh yeah, one other thing I guess I should mention. If you're in the US and you would like to purchase a signed copy directly from me, I offer them to just write me through my website, and we'll work out something. I don't upcharge for signed copies or anything. So yeah, just reach out to me. Yeah.
All right, man. Right. Good night.
Thanks, buddy. Night.